Hey, Bob here. Today I'll be taking a look at the Feker IK75, a plastic exploded 75 layout keyboard with a knob and features quote-unquote gasket mounting. Many have called this the budget GMMK Pro as it comes in at a price of just under 100 USD, but we'll see if that title stands true. As a disclaimer, this was sent to me by Banggood for review, however all my thoughts and opinions are completely independent. Before we jump in, here's a message from today's sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay offers everything you need for all your DIY tech projects. They offer PCB prototyping, manufacturing, assembly, and many other sub-services under these categories. In addition, they have advanced CNC and 3D printing capabilities, which I'll actually be taking a look at in a future video. Their website and ordering process is relatively straightforward, and their prices are very competitive. If you're interested to learn more, the link to their website will be in the description. Right, back to the video. Alright, so this keyboard comes in quite a large box with some branding on the outside. Once opened up, you're greeted with a user's manual going over the onboard functions and shortcuts. Next is the keyboard and extra PC plate, which I'll get back to in a moment. This kit comes with a nice braided USB-C cable, 2-in-1 keycap switch puller, and finally a bag featuring few of Feker's own switches. Right, back to the board. The more you look, the more you realize that the IK75 is essentially a blatant ripoff of the GMMK Pro in terms of appearance. Its design language is very similar aside from the few differences such as the lack of LED strips on the side, screwless case, and obvious plastic versus aluminum chassis. However, despite the cheaper material, its build quality isn't actually all that bad. Overall, the keyboard feels sturdy and has some decent weight due to its batteries. Yes, there are batteries in this thing. Two 4000 mAh packs to be exact. It supports wired, 2.4 GHz, and Bluetooth connections. In addition, powering it on reveals a ring of LEDs allowing for an underglow. Not as cool as the GMMK Pro in my opinion, but better than nothing. Flipping it over, you can see that it utilizes per key RGB. Feker does provide their own software to program the lights, however, there are onboard controls as well. Now, if you've been looking closely, you might have realized that this board uses plate mount stabilizers. At this price, it would have been nice to see them use screw-in ones instead, but it is what it is. And another downside is that it uses north-facing sockets. I'll talk more about the PCB in a bit once everything's disassembled, but for now let's move on to another issue, the gaskets. The whole purpose of gasket mounting is to allow for a softer and more even typing experience by securing the PCB assembly using plush gasket strips. However, for the IK75, it uses hard silicone tabs instead. That, matched with the fact that the case has almost no room for the PCB to move and the steel plate, results in a super firm typing experience to the likes of a stock GMMK Pro or KBD67 Lite. One thing I've noticed about silicone gaskets is that they usually produce a deeper acoustic. Whether this is good or not depends on your preference. In my opinion, this is still better than most budget tray mounts, but don't expect this thing to be super flexy out of the box. As I mentioned earlier, they do include a PC plate, which is pretty nice. It does partially reduce stiffness as shown later on. But let's move on to the switches for now. I'll be using the Feker Holy Pandas, which makes this my first full tactile build. These use polycarbonate tops, nylon housings, palm stems, and 67-gram double-stage springs. They are 3-pin plate mounted and feature a long stem. One thing I noticed is that stock, these have a lot of spring ping, and this unpleasant crunch sound when bottoming out. I would highly suggest you at least lube the springs of these. In addition, there is a bit of give before hitting the tactile bump. Aside from that, it's pretty crispy and feels nice. These are higher pitched than Boba U4Ts, but not as clacky as Holy Pandas. I'll be keeping these stock for now so we can have an unmodded sound test. For the keycaps, I went with GMK 8008 clones. These are cherry profile, double shot ABS, and relatively high quality for the price. The legends are crisp and the colors are vibrant. Note that this set does not clone any of the novelties. Cherry profile keycaps paired with the high-pitched Feker Pandas results in an overall clacky sound profile, which is what I'm going for. A quick note, I can use cherry profile despite the north-facing switches only because the Feker Pandas feature a long stem which removes interference. Now that we've taken a look at all the parts, I put everything together and here's the unmodded sound test. I'm not gonna lie, aside from the rattly stabilizers, this thing actually doesn't sound too bad. There's very little hollowness, probably due to the batteries and case foam. In addition, it also has a slight pop which you don't normally hear on other stock boards. Anyways, I begin disassembly to test out the polycarbonate plate. So for this part I was gonna do a cool transition, but the switches were so hard to remove that the keyboard shifted around, so I just gave up on that. But for real though, these had no reason to be held in so tightly. I was literally using so much force the switch puller started bending. Anyways, that was not very fun. The next step was to open up the case. As I said, it uses a screwless design and is held together with clips. I ended up using guitar picks to get it open. Now if you don't have these, I've seen people use their hands or a plastic card, which works just as well. Now that we are in, lifting up the PCB assembly reveals 2 battery connectors, so just be careful at this step. Alright, with those disconnected, we can take a look at the case foam, which seems to be a thin sheet of EVA. Coming back to the PCB assembly, there's more foam which is double-sided tape to the back. I don't know why they did this, but anyways, this also seems to be EVA foam as well. Loosening 6 screws allows for the plate to come free and reveals that there's even more foam. This time it's for the plate and looks to be made of EVA once again. Here's the super stiff steel plate that made removing the switches torture. Finally, we can have a closer look at the PCB. It supports 5-pin switches, per key customizable RGB, rotary encoder, and uses KL hot swap sockets. It is north facing, which is honestly kinda disappointing considering other competition like the TH80 or NJ80. Both use south facing sockets at a relatively similar price point. The PCB does not support QMK or VIA, but Feker does provide their own software with similar functions. Alright, enough talk about the PCB, back to the polycarbonate plate. Feker does include standoffs for installation, but I'm gonna try it without them for now. For the case foam, I trimmed off the spacebar section as it was sticking out and interfering with the case. Anyways, I positioned the plate and reinstalled the switches. One thing I wanted to note is that while transferring the stabilizers, I noticed that there's almost no loop on them, which explains the loud rattling from earlier. With the switches back in, I reattached the battery connectors, clip in the top housing, and install the keycaps. Here's a stock sound test with the PC plate installed. So with the PC plate, the sound got a little bit higher pitched and the case sounded less hollow. In my opinion, I like this better as it sounded cleaner and fuller than the steel plate. It's kinda hard to tell through a microphone though. In addition, by just swapping the plates, there's already more flex than before. Not much more, but better than nothing. Now with that out of the way, we can begin modding. Starting off with the usual PE foam and 3 layers of tape mod. Once done with that, I work on fixing the stiffness issue. This is where things get a little bit more DIY. As you can see here, there are many standoffs and supports within the case that hold the PCB in plate, limiting movement. Since this is what we don't want, I simply remove them with a pair of pliers and clippers. After, I sanded them down to remove any remaining interference. Also, I sanded down the USB hole as well. This is because the USB port is on the PCB rather than being on a daughter board, meaning it moves. And I ran out of sandpaper, so that's why I'm using a file of a nail clipper. I mean, it works, so... Anyways, after setting down all the posts, I addressed the issue of the silicone tabs. On top of being very stiff, they're also very tall, meaning that when the case is closed, there's only a thin gap left for movement. Now you might think, oh, just stick a normal gasket on top and call it a day. However, all this does is reduce the gap by even more and provides no effect as it will be compressed. So, in order to create more space, I cut exactly 3mm off the top of each tab, allowing for equal room all around. Once cut, I reinstall and add the gasket strip on top. Now instead of being constantly compressed, there should be room for it to freely expand. So yeah, I installed the rest of the modified tabs along with the gaskets on top and clipped it back together to get a quick test, and although I was pretty happy with this, I still wasn't fully satisfied. The center of the board didn't have as much flex as the batteries underneath kept it from depressing. So I did what any reasonable person would do and just accept. Yeah, no, I removed the batteries. Did this essentially eliminate one of the keyboard's main selling points? Yeah. Was it worth it? I mean, from what I can see here, yeah. Moving on, here I'm just taking apart the Feker pandas in preparation for lubing. I noticed that there's the smallest amount of factory lube on the poles, legs, and leaves. On their website, it says that there should be no factory lube, so I don't know what happened with my batch. Since I wanted that crisp, tactile experience, I decided to wash the stems and housings to remove the lube by letting them sit in soapy water for a few hours. So if you're cleaning your switches, make sure to properly remove the soapy water after, otherwise some of your switches may not work. This totally didn't happen to me. While that happens, I got started on modding some plate-mounted Everglide piano stabilizers. I started by clipping the legs and filing the bottom to make sure that it's completely even. Next, I balance the wires, which is probably the most important step when modding stabilizers. You want to twist either end until there's no ticking when placed on a flat surface. This isn't a tutorial, by the way, I'm just quickly going over what I'm doing. After finishing that, I holy mod, lube, reassemble, and reinstall the stabilizers. After testing them out, I noticed a bit of ticking on the spacebar, but more lube took care of that. Back to the switches, they are now clean and dry. I lubed up the springs with a few drops of 105 grade 0 and 205 grade 0 for everything else. With everything done, I begin to reassemble the keyboard. Before I clipped the top housing, I wanted to mention that I removed its silicone tabs, allowing more room for the gaskets. After finishing, I noticed that there's still something blocking the PCB from flex. This turned out to be the little tab that controls connectivity modes. Since the batteries were removed, there's no point in this, so I took it out. Now, we can finally put the keyboard back together. Right, I'm not gonna lie, this actually turned out really nice. The PE foam combined with the new softer gaskets and plate adds up to a nice balance between the two high and low frequencies, and in my opinion, an overall softer, more pleasant typing feel. But there's one small issue. Switches closer to the outer edge would not work from time to time because they're becoming disconnected from the PCB. If you remember earlier, I said I wanted to try the PC plate without standoffs. Since the PCB is much less flexible than the plate, added with the fact that these switches are plate mounted instead of PCB mounted, whenever I push down, the plate pulls the switch pins out of their sockets. So unfortunately, to solve this issue, I had to install the standoffs. While I was at that, I also reinstalled the batteries for the keyboard to be fully functional as I actually wanted to use it. Am I basically reversing the things I did to achieve flex? Yeah, but does it sound worse? Let's take a listen. So unsurprisingly, because of the batteries, the sound became less hollow and a bit deeper. I personally liked the higher pitched one before, but this isn't too bad either. And now the keyboard actually works like how it's supposed to. Anyways, this is the end. These videos do take a lot of time to make, so if you enjoyed them, consider liking and subscribing. It helps a lot.